My name is Alicia Warner, 35 years old, and until last Friday I was the Senior Defense Contract Specialist at NexTech Defense Systems. For 17 years I secured multi-million-dollar government contracts that built this company. Then Brandon Richardson, the CEO's son, fired me exactly 48 hours before my $77,000 performance bonus hit my account. The $300 million defense contract I had nursed for 18 months collapsed 3 days after I left. Before I tell you how I watched a $300 million deal collapse in just 3 days from my living room couch, let me know where you're watching from in the comments and hit that subscribe button if you've ever dealt with workplace betrayal. I still remember my first day at NexTech Defense Systems. I was 18 years old, fresh out of high school with big dreams but limited options. College seemed financially out of reach, so when I landed an entry-level administrative assistant position at this growing defense contractor, I felt like I had won the lottery. The pay was modest, but it was a foot in the door of an industry that fascinated me. From day one, I approached every task with total dedication. While other admins clocked out at 5 p.m. sharp, I regularly stayed until 7 or 8 organizing files, preparing reports, and learning everything I could about government contracting. My supervisor at the time, Diana Harrington, noticed my work ethic and took me under her wing. "Alicia," she said one evening, as we reviewed proposal documentation, most people see paperwork as boring. "You see opportunities in these pages. That kind of vision will take you far here." Those early years were challenging. I worked full-time during the day and took night classes at the local community college studying business administration with a focus on government contracting. Many nights I survived on 4 hours of sleep, fueled by determination and convenience store coffee. While friends my age were enjoying their 20s, I was poring over federal acquisition regulations and memorizing procurement codes. Thomas Richardson, NexTech's founder and CEO, created a culture that rewarded initiative. Unlike many defense contractors with rigid hierarchies, NexTech felt like a family in those days. Thomas regularly walked the floors, knew everyone by name, and celebrated small victories alongside major contract wins. He noticed when someone stayed late or solved a challenging problem. By 23, I had earned my associate degree and a promotion to contract administrator. By 26, I had completed my bachelor's degree in business management and moved up to junior contract specialist. Each promotion came with new challenges that I embraced wholeheartedly. My big breakthrough came when I was 28. Our team was preparing a bid for a $50 million Army communications system. The lead contract specialist fell ill 3 days before submission, and the backup was on vacation. Despite my junior status, I volunteered to step in. For 72 straight hours, I barely left the building, coordinating with engineers, pricing analysts, and legal counsel to complete the proposal. When I finally submitted it with 20 minutes to spare, I collapsed into my office chair physically and mentally drained. 2 months later, we won that contract. Thomas himself came to my cubicle with a bottle of champagne. "You saved this bid, Alicia," he said, pouring plastic cups for the team. "You showed the kind of leadership and commitment that built this company. I won't forget this." He was true to his word. 6 months later, I was promoted to senior contract specialist, with my own office and team. By the time I was 30, I had personally secured over $400 million in government contracts for NexTech. By 35, that number had grown to $1.2 billion. I had become the company's top performer, the person they called when a critical contract needed special handling. The company grew alongside my career. What started as a 40-person operation when I joined had expanded to over 800 employees across 3 states. Our headquarters tripled in size, moving from a modest office park to a gleaming corporate campus. Thomas Richardson became a respected industry figure, and NexTech joined the ranks of mid-tier defense contractors with serious clout in Washington. As the company grew, so did my compensation. My salary increased substantially with each promotion, but the real financial incentive came from NexTech's generous performance bonus system. Each year, contract specialists received bonuses based on the value of contracts secured. For particularly large contracts, special performance bonuses were negotiated in advance. The contract that would ultimately change everything began as a routine Pentagon request for proposals 18 months ago. The Department of Defense needed a next-generation secure communications platform for field operations in remote environments. Initial estimates valued the contract at around $100 million, significant but not extraordinary by defense industry standards. However, as I worked with our engineering team to develop the proposal, we identified ways to expand the system's capabilities substantially while keeping costs competitive. Rather than just meeting the baseline requirements, we proposed an integrated solution that addressed several related needs the Pentagon hadn't explicitly included, but had mentioned in strategic planning documents I had researched. When we submitted our comprehensive proposal, the contracting officers were impressed. What began as a $100 million opportunity evolved into a potential $300 million contract as the scope expanded. This would be the largest single contract in NexTech's history, a company-defining achievement. Given the contract's size and importance, Thomas and I negotiated a special performance bonus of $77,000 to be paid upon contract signing. This was in addition to my regular annual bonus and reflected both the contract's value and the extraordinary effort required to secure it. Everything changed when Thomas's son Brandon joined the company. Brandon was 32, fresh from an Ivy League MBA program with zero experience in defense contracting. Nevertheless, Thomas appointed him Chief Operating Officer, positioning him as the heir apparent. From our first meeting, I sensed trouble. While Thomas had built his company on relationships, technical expertise, and integrity, Brandon seemed more concerned with status and authority. In our initial department review, he interrupted my presentation 3 times to suggest modern business approaches that would have violated federal contracting regulations. With all due respect, I explained carefully, government contracting follows strict regulations that differ significantly from commercial business practices. What works in the private sector can create compliance issues with federal contracts. Brandon's expression hardened. I didn't spend 2 years at business school to be lectured on how to run a company by someone without an MBA. The room fell silent. Robert Blackwell, my direct supervisor, shifted uncomfortably. Margaret Wilson from HR glanced down at her notes. Jennifer Moore, my closest colleague, stared wide-eyed at Brandon's unprofessional response. Of course, I said evenly, I'm simply providing context on regulatory requirements that impact our operations. I'm happy to share the Federal Acquisition Regulation Guidelines if that would be helpful. The meeting continued, but something fundamental had shifted. I had become a target. In the following weeks, Brandon began questioning every aspect of my work. He demanded justifications for established processes and criticized methodologies that had secured billions in contracts. In meetings, he would suddenly ask me to explain complex regulatory details, clearly hoping to catch me unprepared. What he didn't realize was that after 17 years, I could recite most relevant FAR provisions from memory. Meanwhile, the $300 million communications contract entered its final phase. The Pentagon team was impressed with our proposal and technical demonstrations. We had moved ahead of our competitors and were in exclusive negotiations to finalize terms. All signs pointed to success, which made Brandon's interference all the more dangerous. The first major confrontation with Brandon came 3 months after he joined NexTech. We were preparing for a crucial meeting with Pentagon officials to discuss technical specifications for the communications system. Brandon arrived unannounced at my office the evening before. I've reviewed the contract terms, he announced, dropping a marked-up document on my desk. I've made some adjustments to increase our profit margin. I reviewed his changes with growing alarm. He had altered key deliverable timelines, modified performance guarantees, and adjusted intellectual property provisions. Any one of these changes would raise red flags with the contracting officers. Together, they might sink the entire deal. Brandon, these changes fundamentally alter our proposal, I explained. We're in the final negotiation stage. Major changes now would restart the evaluation process and potentially disqualify us. That's dramatic, he scoffed. This is just standard business negotiation. Government contracting doesn't work that way, I said firmly. Our initial proposal created binding commitments. These changes would constitute a material modification that could trigger a new competitive bidding process. Brandon's face flushed. I'm not asking for your opinion. Implement these changes before tomorrow's meeting. I took a deep breath. I'm sorry, but I can't do that. It would violate federal procurement regulations and potentially expose NexTech to fraud allegations. I need to consult with Thomas before making any changes of this magnitude. "You're going over my head?" he asked incredulously. "I'm following proper protocol for material contract modifications," I corrected. "As the contract specialist of record, I have fiduciary responsibilities I'm legally bound to uphold." Brandon stormed out. 20 minutes later, I received a call from Thomas asking me to come to his office. When I arrived, Brandon was already there, looking smugly confident. I calmly explained the situation, outlining the legal and business risks of Brandon's proposed changes. Thomas listened attentively, then turned to his son. "Alicia is right about the regulatory constraints," he said. "We need to maintain the original terms for tomorrow's meeting." Brandon protested, but Thomas was firm. I left feeling relieved, but noticed the tension between father and son. I had won this battle, but at what cost? In the weeks that followed, I noticed Thomas becoming increasingly distant. Our previously regular check-ins became infrequent and brief. When we did speak, he seemed distracted and less engaged with the details that had always interested him. Meanwhile, Brandon began a subtle campaign against me. I found myself excluded from meetings relevant to my projects. My team members were reassigned to other initiatives without consultation. Emails went unanswered, and my input was increasingly ignored in decisions that directly affected my contracts. The office politics shifted perceptibly. Colleagues who had previously sought my advice now hesitated to be seen talking with me. Conversations would stop when I entered the break room. I was still doing my job effectively, but in an increasingly hostile environment. Jennifer, who had become a true friend over the years, confirmed my suspicions during a confidential lunch off-site. "Brandon has been telling directors that you're resistant to change and undermining his authority," she revealed. "He's positioning himself as the innovative future, and you as the outdated past. It's completely unfair, but people are afraid to challenge him." "What about Thomas?" I asked. "Does he see what's happening?" Jennifer hesitated. "Thomas seems torn. He values your contribution, but Brandon is his son. Family is complicated." Despite the growing hostility, I remained determined to save the relationship and my position at NexTech. I made deliberate efforts to include Brandon in communications, sought his input on appropriate matters, and acknowledged his ideas when they had merit. I hoped that by demonstrating my willingness to collaborate, I could diffuse the tension. For a brief period, things seemed to improve. Brandon responded to my emails more promptly, and even complimented one of my presentations. I began to believe we could establish a functional, professional relationship. Then came the misunderstanding that shattered that hope. The Pentagon requested clarification on certain technical specifications. As was standard procedure, I consulted with our engineering team and drafted a response that I sent to Robert for approval before submitting it to the government. The next morning, Brandon burst into my office waving a printout of my email. "Why wasn't I consulted on this response?" he demanded. "You're going behind my back again." "This is routine correspondence following established procedures," I explained. "Robert reviews all technical clarifications before they go to the client." "I'm implementing new procedures," Brandon declared. "Nothing goes to clients without my review first." "That would create significant delays in time-sensitive communications," I pointed out. "Federal contracting officers expect prompt responses." "Are you refusing to follow my directives?" Brandon's voice rose. "I'm expressing concern about a procedural change that could negatively impact client relationships and contract performance," I replied, evenly conscious of colleagues within earshot. Brandon leaned across my desk. "Just remember who's in charge here." He walked out, leaving me shaken but outwardly composed. The final blow in this phase came when I discovered I had been excluded from a major presentation to the Pentagon team about my contract. Brandon had scheduled the meeting without informing me and planned to lead the discussion himself, despite his limited understanding of the technical details or contracting nuances. I learned about it only when Jennifer texted me, "Why aren't you at the Richardson Center for the Pentagon briefing?" I had no answer. With the contract entering its critical final phase, I refused to let Brandon's hostility derail 17 years of hard work and a $300 million opportunity for NexTech. While officially excluded from key meetings, I worked nights and weekends to ensure every detail of the contract was perfect. I reviewed technical specifications, pricing models, implementation timelines, and compliance requirements, addressing potential issues before they could become problems. Despite Brandon's attempts to sideline me, the Pentagon officials continued to reach out directly. They had worked with me for years and trusted my expertise. I led several crucial meetings with Department of Defense technical teams, answering complex questions about our proposed communication systems capabilities in remote environments. These meetings went exceptionally well. Colonel James Patterson, the lead technical evaluator, specifically commended our team's thorough preparation. "This is exactly why we value working with NexTech," he told me after one particularly productive session. "Your attention to detail and understanding of our operational needs sets you apart from competitors." The following morning, I arrived at work to find a company-wide email from Brandon taking credit for the successful meeting. His message thanked our talented team in a generic way but made no mention of my leadership role or the nights and weekends of preparation that made the success possible. That same week, Brandon introduced Miles Harrington as a new special contract consultant to our team. Miles had been Brandon's classmate at business school, but had zero experience in government contracting. Nevertheless, he was given authority to review and optimize all aspects of the communications contract. During his review, Miles proposed several concerning modifications to the technical architecture of our communication system. He suggested replacing our proprietary encryption protocol with a commercial alternative that would be cheaper but failed to meet the military-grade security requirements specified in the contract. "This will save us nearly $2 million in development costs," Miles explained during a technical review meeting. "But it doesn't meet the Level 4 security certification required in Section 3.2 of the RFP," I pointed out. "Using this alternative would make our system non-compliant." Miles glanced at Brandon, who jumped in immediately. "We can address any minor compliance issues later. Let's focus on improving the bottom line now." "These aren't minor issues," I insisted. "Security certification is a pass divided by fail requirement. We can't bid non-compliant systems and fix them later." Always the pessimist Brandon sighed dramatically. "This is why we needed fresh perspectives." I documented my concerns in a detailed email to Robert and the technical team, explaining the regulatory and contractual risks of the proposed changes. Robert acknowledged my points privately, but admitted he was under pressure. "Brandon has Thomas's ear right now," he confided. "Be careful about pushing back too hard." The atmosphere grew increasingly tense. In meetings, Brandon would interrupt my presentations or dismiss my input with comments like, "That's the old way of thinking," or "We're taking a more innovative approach now." These public humiliations were clearly designed to diminish my authority and influence. Colleagues I had worked with for years began avoiding me in the hallways. Lunch invitations stopped. I found myself increasingly isolated as people feared association with someone who had clearly fallen from favor with the Richardson family. During a department update meeting, I learned that Brandon planned to restructure the contracts division after the current quarter. While he didn't explicitly mention eliminations, his comments about streamlining redundant roles and consolidating oversight functions made his intentions clear enough. The situation took a more serious turn when Colonel Patterson called me directly one afternoon, bypassing the new communication protocols Brandon had established. "Alicia, we've received some concerning documentation regarding modifications to the secure transmission protocols," he said, his usually friendly tone now formal and guarded. "These changes weren't discussed in our technical reviews and appear to substantially alter the security architecture we approved." My heart sank. "Could you send me the specific documents you're referencing? I need to review them immediately." When the files arrived, I was horrified. Without consulting the technical team or me, Brandon and Miles had submitted alternative specifications that significantly modified our proposed solution. The changes compromised several critical security features to reduce costs and accelerate the production timeline. I spent that night creating a detailed comparison document showing how the unauthorized modifications diverged from our original proposal and violated key requirements. The next morning, I requested an emergency meeting with Robert to address the situation before it spiraled further. "This is extremely serious," I told him, presenting my findings. "These unauthorized changes could not only lose us the contract, but could potentially trigger a federal investigation for bait and switch tactics." Robert reviewed my documentation with growing concern. This is bad, he admitted. Really bad. But Brandon submitted these changes with Thomas's approval. I'm not sure how much I can do. Thomas approved these. I was stunned. There's no way he understood the implications. He would never knowingly risk non-compliance. Thomas is delegating more decisions to Brandon these days, Robert said carefully. He's not reviewing technical details as closely as he used to. That night I barely slept. Everything I had worked for was at risk because of inexperienced, arrogant leadership that didn't understand the industry they were operating in. The company I had helped build, that I had poured 17 years of my life into, was headed toward disaster. My concerns proved well-founded the next morning, when my phone rang at 7:30 a.m. It was Susan Chen, the lead contracting officer for the Pentagon. Alicia, we have serious concerns about the recent modifications submitted for the SCIP contract, she said, her voice crisp and professional. These changes represent material deviations from the proposal we tentatively accepted. We need to discuss this immediately. The situation was unraveling exactly as I had feared. I was caught in an impossible position trying to save a critical contract while working around leadership that was actively undermining it. The final week before the scheduled contract signing began with a sense of impending disaster. Despite my warnings, Brandon remained determined to implement his cost-cutting modifications. The Pentagon had scheduled a final review meeting to address their concerns, and the tension throughout NexTech was palpable. The meeting took place in our largest conference room. Present were 5 Pentagon representatives, including Colonel Patterson and Susan Chen, alongside NexTech's leadership team. Thomas sat at the head of the table with Brandon prominently positioned at his right hand. I was seated near the far end next to Robert and our technical leads. Brandon led the presentation, confidently displaying slides that glossed over the substantial changes he had made to our proposal. His business school polish was evident in the perfectly crafted charts and buzzword-laden descriptions. What his presentation lacked was technical accuracy and an understanding of military requirements. Colonel Patterson interrupted 15 minutes in. Mr. Richardson, these specifications differ significantly from what we previously approved. The modified encryption protocol doesn't meet our security requirements for hostile environment deployment. Brandon smiled smoothly. We've optimized the solution to provide equivalent security with greater efficiency. That's not accurate, Colonel Patterson replied flatly. Our technical team has reviewed these modifications and found them inadequate for our operational needs. The room grew tense. Susan Chen opened a folder and began citing specific contract clauses that the modifications violated. Brandon's confident facade began to crack as the questioning grew more pointed and technical. I could see the contract slipping away. 17 months of work, a $300 million opportunity for the company, and my $77,000 bonus were all about to vanish because of Brandon's arrogance. I couldn't remain silent. If I may, I interjected carefully, I believe there's been an internal miscommunication about these modifications. NexTech remains fully committed to the original specifications that met all security requirements. Brandon shot me a venomous look, but I continued. With your permission, I'd like our chief engineer to clarify our technical approach and confirm our commitment to the Level 4 security certification as originally proposed. Thomas nodded his approval, and our chief engineer proceeded to walk back most of Brandon's modifications, reaffirming our commitment to the original design. The tension in the room gradually subsided as the Pentagon team received the assurances they needed. By the meeting's end, we had salvaged the situation. The Pentagon representatives agreed to proceed with the contract based on the original specifications. As they gathered their materials to leave, Susan Chen approached me. That was close, she said quietly. Too close. We value our relationship with NexTech, but we need consistent, reliable communication. These last-minute changes are concerning. I understand completely, I assured her. It won't happen again. As the room cleared, Brandon cornered me in the hallway, his face flushed with anger. How dare you undermine me like that, he hissed. You made me look incompetent. I saved the contract, I replied evenly. Those modifications would have disqualified us. That wasn't your call to make, he snapped. You're forgetting your place in this company. My place is to ensure we meet our contractual obligations and maintain our reputation with clients, I said. That's what I've done for 17 years. We'll see how much longer that lasts, he muttered before storming off. That afternoon, Thomas called me to his office. I arrived, hoping for recognition of how I had saved the situation, but Brandon was already there, standing beside his father's desk with arms crossed. Alicia, Thomas began, his tone unusually formal. Brandon tells me you publicly contradicted him in today's meeting. I clarified our technical commitments when it became clear the Pentagon was prepared to withdraw due to the unauthorized modifications I explained. The changes violated contract requirements and would have lost us the deal. There are proper channels for raising concerns, Thomas said. Publicly contradicting leadership undermines our company's structure. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Thomas, with all due respect, I've dedicated 17 years to building NexTech's reputation. Today, I prevented a disaster that would have cost us a $300 million contract and damaged our standing with the Department of Defense. Thomas looked tired, older than his 64 years. I understand you believe you are acting in the company's best interest. But as we grow, we need to maintain clear lines of authority. Brandon is implementing new processes that may feel uncomfortable initially. It was clear that Thomas had already chosen sides. Whatever influence I once had was gone. For the next 2 days, I focused on properly documenting everything related to the contract. If I couldn't prevent disaster through persuasion, I would at least create a paper trail showing I had raised appropriate concerns through proper channels. Despite the tension, the Pentagon conditionally approved the contract pending final review of the corrected specifications. We had a scheduled signing date for the following Monday. I had fulfilled all requirements for my performance bonus, which company policy stated would be paid on the Friday before the signing. Everything was set. Thursday evening, Jennifer and I celebrated quietly at a restaurant away from the office. Despite the ongoing difficulties with Brandon, I felt a sense of accomplishment. The contract was secured. My bonus would arrive the next day, and perhaps tensions would ease once the deal was finalized. You pulled it off despite everything, Jennifer said, raising her glass. This contract is happening because of you, regardless of who takes the credit. 17 years, I reflected. Worth it for moments like this. We parted with a hug, both feeling cautiously optimistic about the future. Friday morning, I arrived at my office to find Brandon waiting inside, seated in my chair. Miles stood by the window, and a security guard I didn't recognize waited by the door. Good morning, Alicia, Brandon said with an unsettling smile. I'll make this quick. Your position has been eliminated in our restructuring. Today is your last day. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? The contract signing is Monday. This makes no sense. Your contributions have been appreciated, but we're moving in a different direction, Brandon continued mechanically. Miles will be taking over your responsibilities. You can't do this, I protested. I'm the primary contact on the Pentagon contract. I built the relationship over years. Brandon stood, straightening his expensive suit. It's already done. HR has your separation package. The security team will escort you to collect your personal belongings. As the reality sank in, I realized what was happening. This is about my bonus, isn't it? It's supposed to be deposited today. A flicker of something crossed Brandon's face, a momentary break in his corporate mask. He smirked slightly as he walked toward the door. You're done here, Alicia. Security will see you out. I stood in shocked silence as Brandon and Miles left. The security guard remained watching impassively as I was forced to pack 17 years of professional life into a cardboard box. Photos, award certificates, and personal items were unceremoniously piled together. Margaret from HR appeared with paperwork, looking uncomfortable and avoiding eye contact. This contains information about your severance and continuation of benefits, she said quietly. I'm sorry it's happening this way, Alicia. What about my performance bonus, I asked. It's contractually due today. Margaret hesitated. According to the documentation I received, bonus eligibility requires active employment at the time of contract signing. Since that's Monday, and your employment ends today. The calculated cruelty of the timing hit me fully. Brandon had deliberately terminated me 48 hours before my bonus would have been paid. $77,000 I had earned through 18 months of work gone with the stroke of a pen. I was escorted through the building like a criminal past colleagues who averted their eyes. 17 years of dedication ended with a humiliating walk of shame to the parking garage, a security guard ensuring I left the premises immediately. As I placed the box in my car, I felt numb. The company I had helped build that I had sacrificed for had discarded me without a second thought. And somewhere in the building, Brandon Richardson was probably celebrating his victory. The weekend passed in a blur of shock and grief. I alternated between anger, disbelief, and a profound sense of betrayal. 17 years of my life had been dedicated to NexTech, often at the expense of personal relationships and outside interests. Now I had nothing to show for it except a modest severance package and a gaping hole where my professional identity had been. I ignored calls from Jennifer and other colleagues, unable to face their pity or questions. I needed time to process what had happened and figure out my next steps. The loss of the $77,000 bonus was especially painful. I had already allocated that money in my mind for paying off the remainder of my student loans and making a down payment on a condo I had been eyeing. Monday morning, my phone rang at 8:15 a.m. It was Jennifer, and this time I answered. "Alicia, you need to know what's happening," she said urgently. "The Pentagon team arrived for the contract signing, and all hell broke loose. They realized you were gone and demanded to know why their primary contact had been removed without notice." I sat up straighter. What happened? Brandon tried to smooth things over, but he couldn't answer their technical questions. Then they discovered that Miles had reinserted some of the modified specifications into the final documentation without their approval. A cold satisfaction began to replace my numbness. "How bad is it?" "Catastrophic," Jennifer replied. Colonel Patterson accused NexTech of bait-and-switch tactics and acting in bad faith. Susan Chen formally suspended the contract review pending a full investigation. They walked out Alicia. $300 million just walked out the door. I should have felt vindicated, but mostly I felt sad. So many people at NexTech would be affected by this disaster. People with families and mortgages, people who had worked hard and done nothing wrong. "Thomas is beside himself," Jennifer continued. "He's been locked in the conference room with the executive team since the Pentagon left. The legal department is in panic mode." An hour later, my phone lit up with a breaking news alert. NexTech's stock had plummeted 22% on news that the anticipated Department of Defense contract had fallen through. Analysts were speculating about the cause and questioning the company's leadership. Throughout the day, my phone buzzed with messages from former colleagues seeking information or simply expressing shock at the rapidly unfolding situation. Robert texted to say the office was in chaos, with emergency meetings occurring hourly and rumors flying about potential layoffs if the contract couldn't be salvaged. Late that afternoon, my phone rang with a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, I heard Brandon's voice, tense and frantic. "What did you do?" he demanded without preamble. "Did you contact the Pentagon after you left? Did you sabotage this deal?" I let his questions hang in the air for a moment before responding calmly. "I didn't have to do anything, Brandon. Your own actions took care of that." "This is your fault," he insisted, his voice rising. "You turned them against us before you left. Fix this now. Tell them whatever they need to hear so we can get this contract back on track." "I'm no longer a NexTech employee," I reminded him. "You made that very clear on Friday. The company's contractual issues are no longer my concern." "I swear to God, if you don't fix this," he threatened vaguely before I interrupted. "Goodbye, Brandon." I ended the call, blocking his number immediately afterward. That evening, I finally turned my attention to my company email. Before leaving on Friday, I had forwarded several key messages to my personal account, something I rarely did, but felt necessary given the circumstances. As I reviewed these emails, I discovered something significant. 2 weeks earlier, Brandon had received detailed information about the timing of performance bonuses from the finance department. He had specifically asked about my bonus and the exact payment date. He had known precisely what he was doing when he terminated me on Friday instead of Monday. Even more damning, I found an email chain between Brandon and Miles discussing the contract transition. In it, Brandon explicitly stated his plan to remove me from the project once the Pentagon was fully committed, but before the final payment was due. Miles had questioned whether removing the lead specialist so abruptly might concern the client. Brandon had dismissed this concern, writing, "They're already invested. By the time they realize what's happened, it'll be too late to back out." This evidence of deliberate sabotage of both my position and potentially the contract itself made my blood boil. Brandon had gambled with a $300 million contract and hundreds of jobs to save the company a $77,000 bonus payment that I had rightfully earned. As I processed this information, I felt deeply conflicted about the company's downfall. While Brandon deserved the consequences of his actions, many innocent employees would suffer from his mistakes. People like Jennifer, who had bills to pay and families to support, might lose their livelihoods because of one man's arrogance and short-sightedness. The next morning, news outlets began reporting more details about NexTech's contract disaster. Industry publications speculated about irregularities in the final documentation and quoted anonymous Pentagon sources expressing concerns about inconsistent technical specifications and questionable business practices. By midday Tuesday, my phone rang again. This time it was Thomas Richardson himself. "Alicia," he said when I answered, his voice sounding decades older than it had just days before. "I hope you're willing to talk to me." "I'm listening," I replied neutrally. "The situation here island. Difficult," he said carefully. "I believe there have been serious misunderstandings and possibly some poor decisions made." "That's one way to put it," I acknowledged. Thomas sighed heavily. "The Pentagon team has made it clear they won't proceed without your involvement. They've requested you specifically as the point of contact for any contract revival discussions." He paused. "I know we have no right to ask, but would you consider consulting with us to help resolve this situation?" It was a pivotal moment. Part of me wanted to refuse outright to let Brandon face the full consequences of his actions. But another part remembered the 17 years I'd invested in building something I believed in, and all the innocent employees who might suffer. "I'll need to think about it," I told Thomas, "and I'll need to consult with an attorney about my options. I'll call you tomorrow with my decision." As I ended the call, I knew exactly what my next step would be. Brandon had taught me a valuable lesson about protecting myself in the corporate world. Now, I would put that lesson to good use. The morning after Thomas's call, I contacted Patricia Winters, a prominent employment attorney, specializing in executive compensation disputes. After explaining my situation and sharing the emails I had saved, she agreed to represent me immediately. "This is a clear case of termination designed to avoid payment of earned compensation," she explained during our consultation. The timing combined with these emails creates a compelling narrative of bad faith. With Patricia's guidance, I spent the next 2 days compiling a comprehensive documentation package. I gathered performance reviews from my entire 17-year career, commendation letters from government clients, records of contracts I had secured, and detailed timelines of the recent events, including Brandon's interference with the courting Pentagon contract. The resulting document told a powerful story of dedication, achievement, and ultimately betrayal. It laid out in meticulous detail how I had earned my bonus through 18 months of work, only to be terminated 48 hours before payment, specifically to deny me compensation. Patricia also advised me on how to respond to Thomas's request for assistance with the Pentagon. "You're in an extraordinarily strong negotiating position," she noted. "They need you far more than you need them. We can leverage that to rectify the bonus situation and secure additional compensation for the wrongful termination." 3 days after his initial call, I agreed to meet Thomas at a neutral location, a private room at a downtown restaurant. Patricia accompanied me as both legal counsel and moral support. Thomas arrived alone, looking haggard and defeated. After brief awkward greetings, I presented him with a copy of my documentation package. "Before we discuss anything else," I said calmly, "I'd like you to review this information. It details my contributions to NexTech over 17 years and the circumstances of my termination. My attorney has advised me that I have grounds for significant legal action, but I'd prefer to resolve this situation amicably if possible." Thomas spent 20 minutes reviewing the materials, his expression growing increasingly troubled as he read the emails between Brandon and Miles. "I had no idea," he said, finally looking up. "No idea this was happening. Brandon told me the reorganization was planned for months and that you had been informed of the transition plan." "That was clearly not the case," Patricia interjected professionally. Thomas nodded slowly. "I see that now." He turned to me directly. "Alicia, I owe you an apology. You dedicated 17 years to this company, and we failed you completely. What Brandon did was inexcusable. While his apology seemed sincere, I remained focused on the business at hand. I appreciate that, Thomas. Now we need to discuss how to move forward constructively. Over the next hour, we negotiated terms. Thomas agreed to immediately pay my $77,000 bonus, plus interest, provide an additional severance package equivalent to 1 year's salary, deliver glowing recommendations for future employment, and sign a non-disparagement agreement. In exchange, I would consult on the Pentagon contract situation for 2 weeks at 5 times my former hourly rate. The board is meeting tomorrow to discuss leadership changes, Thomas added as we concluded. Brandon's actions have forced some difficult conversations about succession planning. When our meeting ended, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The situation wasn't perfect, but justice was being served. More importantly, I had stood up for myself and reclaimed my professional dignity. The following days brought a flurry of activity. Brandon made repeated attempts to contact me, which I ignored on my attorney's advice. Meanwhile, industry contacts began reaching out with information about NexTech's internal chaos. The board had indeed met, and apparently the discussion had been heated. By the end of the week, I received calls from 3 competing defense contractors, all having heard through the grapevine about my departure from NexTech and eager to discuss opportunities. Word travels fast in specialized industries, and my reputation for delivering complex contracts had evidently survived my unceremonious exit. Most significantly, Susan Chen from the Pentagon requested a private meeting to discuss contract continuity concerns. With Thomas's approval as part of our consulting agreement, I met with her and Colonel Patterson at a secure Department of Defense facility. Frankly, Alicia, Susan said after preliminaries, we've lost confidence in NexTech's current leadership. The inconsistencies in the final documentation raised serious red flags about their commitment to the specifications we approved. The technical requirements for this system are non-negotiable, Colonel Patterson added. The modifications submitted without consultation would have compromised operational security in the field. That's completely unacceptable. I understand your concerns completely, I assured them. The modifications were not approved by the technical team and don't reflect NexTech's actual capabilities or intentions. What we need to know, Susan said, leaning forward, is whether this contract can be salvaged with appropriate leadership changes or if we should restart the procurement process with other vendors. This was a pivotal moment. Despite everything I believed in NexTech's technical solution and the team that had developed it, many good people would suffer if the company lost this contract permanently. With proper oversight and the right leadership, NexTech can deliver exactly what the Pentagon needs. I stated confidently. The technical team is exceptional, and the original specifications were sound. This situation resulted from inexperienced management interfering with established processes, not from any fundamental flaw in the company's capabilities. Susan and Colonel Patterson exchanged looks. We value your assessment, Susan said finally. Based on our long working relationship, we're willing to reopen discussions if certain conditions are met. Those conditions included Brandon's complete removal from any involvement with the contract, reinstatement of the original technical specifications, enhanced oversight protocols, and a restructured communication framework with the Pentagon team. Most significantly, they requested that I serve as a third-party consultant during the transition period to ensure compliance with all requirements. When I conveyed these terms to Thomas, he didn't hesitate. We'll do whatever it takes. The board has already voted to reassign Brandon away from operations. He'll be moving to a strategic planning role with no direct oversight of contracts or client relationships. A strategic planning role sounded like a face-saving demotion for the CEO's son, but it was better than nothing. More importantly, it would keep him far away from critical contracts and client relationships. Over the next week, I worked with NexTech's technical team to restore the original specifications and prepare for renewed negotiations with the Pentagon. I was scrupulously professional, focusing solely on salvaging the contract rather than dwelling on past grievances. By the end of my 2-week consulting period, the Pentagon had provisionally reinstated the contract process with NexTech under new leadership. Robert had been promoted to oversee all contract operations, with Miles quietly exited from the company. The $300 million deal was back on track, though, with enhanced oversight and more stringent delivery milestones. As my consulting role concluded, I found myself at a crossroads. 3 competing firms had made excellent offers, and the Pentagon had suggested I consider a role as a civilian contractor, specializing in procurement oversight. Each path offered its own advantages and challenges. The betrayal I had experienced had changed me, but also freed me to consider options I might never have explored otherwise. 6 months after my departure from NexTech, I found myself sitting in my new corner office at Meridian Defense Systems, a respected mid-sized contractor known for its ethical business practices and collaborative culture. As their new director of government partnerships, I led a team of 15 contract specialists with authority to implement best practices based on my years of experience. The contrast with my final months at NexTech couldn't have been more striking. At Meridian, my expertise was valued and my input sought out by leadership. The CEO, Victoria Harrington, had personally recruited me, promising a workplace where professionals were respected and compensated fairly for their contributions. "We've admired your work from afar for years," she had told me during our initial interview. "Your reputation for integrity and technical excellence is exactly what we want to be known for." She had been true to her word. My onboarding included a clear compensation structure with quarterly performance bonuses paid automatically when targets were met regardless of timing or other factors. The company culture emphasized collaboration over competition, with recognition distributed to all team members who contributed to successful projects. One of my first initiatives was establishing a mentoring program for women in defense contracting. The industry remained predominantly male, particularly in leadership positions, and I wanted to help other women navigate the complex professional landscape I had learned to master the hard way. Sarah, one of my mentees, had asked during our first session, "How do you stay confident in rooms full of men who assume they know more than you do?" "Knowledge is your armor," I told her. "Know the regulations better than anyone else in the room. Document everything. Build relationships based on competence and reliability. And remember that your perspective adds unique value precisely because it's different." The mentoring program quickly became one of the most rewarding aspects of my new role. Watching these talented young women grow in confidence and skill reminded me of my own journey and helped heal some of the wounds from my NexTech experience. Surprisingly, Thomas Richardson reached out about 3 months after I started at Meridian. He requested a coffee meeting, which I cautiously accepted. When we met, he seemed older but somehow lighter, as if a burden had been lifted. "NexTech finalized the Pentagon contract last month," he informed me. "Robert did an excellent job picking up where you left off, though everyone acknowledges it would have been smoother with your continued involvement." I nodded, unsurprised. Robert had always been capable and thorough, just overshadowed by politics. "Brandon is no longer with the company," Thomas continued, staring into his coffee. "The board insisted on his resignation after reviewing the full situation. It was difficult as his father, but necessary as CEO." "That must have been challenging," I acknowledged, finding genuine sympathy despite everything Brandon had done. Thomas nodded. "It was. But it forced me to recognize that I had been blinded by family loyalty, to the point of compromising the company I spent my life building." He looked up. "I want to apologize again for what happened to you. It was inexcusable." "I appreciate that," I said sincerely. "I've moved on to a better situation, but those 17 years were an important part of my life." "You deserved better," Thomas agreed. "I failed as a leader by not seeing what was happening under my nose." We parted on surprisingly cordial terms. While I wouldn't call us friends, there was a mutual respect and a sense of closure that helped me put that chapter of my life to rest. The healing process wasn't always linear. Some days, unexpected triggers would bring back the feelings of betrayal and anger. A news article about NexTech, or a chance encounter with a former colleague, could reopen wounds I thought had closed. But over time, these moments became less frequent and less intense. Working with my therapist, I came to recognize that the experience, while painful, had taught me invaluable lessons about workplace dynamics, self-advocacy, and resilience. I had learned to document everything, to trust my instincts about problematic behavior, and to value myself enough to walk away from toxic situations. Most importantly, I learned to establish healthier boundaries between my personal identity and my professional role. At NexTech, I had allowed my sense of self to become too entwined with my job, making the betrayal feel like a rejection of my entire being. Now I maintained a clearer separation, finding fulfillment in relationships and interests outside of work. My new role at Meridian brought exciting professional challenges. Within my first year, I helped secure 2 major contracts totaling over $400 million. The work was intellectually stimulating, and the collaborative environment allowed everyone involved to share in the success. I maintained contact with Jennifer and a few other close colleagues from NexTech. Jennifer eventually joined me at Meridian, bringing her exceptional technical writing skills to our proposal team. Over lunch on her first day, she marveled at the difference in atmosphere. "It's like people actually enjoy working together here," she observed. "No one's looking over their shoulder waiting for the next political attack." "That's by design," I explained. Victoria believes that psychological safety is essential for high-performance teams. People can't do their best work when they're constantly defending themselves. Beyond my professional rehabilitation, I focused on rebuilding the personal life I had neglected during my NexTech years. I joined a hiking club, took cooking classes, reconnected with old friends, and even started dating again after a long hiatus. These activities helped me rediscover parts of myself that had been overshadowed by my career obsession. I also became an advocate for ethical business practices in the defense industry, occasionally speaking at conferences about the importance of integrity in government contracting. Without naming names or violating confidentiality, I shared lessons from my experiences about how toxic leadership can undermine even the most promising business opportunities. When asked for advice by young professionals entering the field, I emphasized 3 key points. First, know your worth and document your contributions. Keep records of your accomplishments and the value you bring to your organization. Second, trust your instincts about workplace dynamics. If something feels wrong, it probably island. Don't ignore red flags out of loyalty or fear. Finally, remember that your career is a marathon, not a sprint. Sometimes taking a step back, or sideways, leads to better opportunities than pushing forward in a toxic environment. Looking back on the tumultuous end of my NexTech career from the vantage point of my new success, I realized that what had initially felt like the worst professional disaster of my life had ultimately freed me from a situation that had become increasingly unhealthy. The betrayal had been painful, but it forced me to advocate for myself in ways I might never have otherwise. The $77,000 bonus that Brandon had tried to deny me had long since been paid with interest. I used it as planned for my condo down payment, creating a physical space that represented my new beginning. Each morning, as I enjoyed coffee on my balcony before heading to a job where I felt valued, I reflected on how differently everything had turned out from what I had expected. Life rarely follows the path we envision. Sometimes the worst moments open doors to opportunities we couldn't have imagined. The key is to maintain your integrity, know your worth, and remain open to the unexpected possibilities that emerge from even the most challenging situations. Have you ever experienced a betrayal that ultimately led to something better? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that setbacks can become stepping stones to a better future. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, sometimes losing what you thought you wanted opens the door to what you truly deserve.